I'm very pleased to be here. Very, very pleased to be here. Can I, of course, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thank you all for coming along. And I do want to try and keep this short today and not provide you with a laundry list of self-praise, all the different things that we've done. Those things are well known to you in many ways. I want instead to run through some of the challenges and the opportunities that our state faces, and I want to try and do it quickly so that there's as much time as possible at the end for questions. I think that's a bit of a different approach, but let's see how we go. As you know, it's been over 6 months since the Victorian people gave our party, the Labor Party, the greatest gift of all, the honour of leading a government and the task of changing a state. The mandate to rebuild our economy, to restore our health system, repair our schools and bring TAFE back from the brink of fundamental collapse. And, ladies and gentlemen, we got to work on day one. That's what these last 6 months have been all about, getting on with it and keeping our word. We're not a government that will go missing in action. We're not a government that will dodge a difficult decision, big or small. We're not a government that will snooze our way through a jobs crisis. This is what Victorians have learnt over the last 4 years. Things move fast, and if you stand still, the world passes you by. Indeed, if you stand still, you in fact go backwards. You lose jobs, you lose opportunities, you lose your edge. That's what I've learnt. I think it's what Victorians know and understand really clearly. I think these last 4 years have done us a lot of damage. 4 vacant years, which didn't leave a legacy. Indeed, they barely cast a shadow. It'll take a lot of hard work indeed, to get us back to where we were and to go beyond that. A lot of hard work and indeed some hard truths. We do need to be honest. We need to acknowledge that after this period, this recent period, we are in danger, I think, as a state, as a community and an economy, of losing our crown as the #1 state in the nation, the #1 economy in our country, the sporting capital of our nation, the creative and ideas, the innovation capital of our nation, and of course, our nation's home to all the big major events and indeed the world's most livable city. We're in danger of losing our crown, and if that happens, well, that's a very, very bad outcome for all of us. We're done, many would say. I can tell you, and I think many of you will have a sense of this anyway as you move around different parts of the country, New South Wales is roaring ahead. Queensland's back on track. South Australia is making some tough and truly transformative decisions about the future of their state, their economy and more broadly. And even Canberra's on its way to becoming, and I quote my good friend Chief Minister Andrew Barr, the, quote, coolest little capital in the world. I like that, it's a very good quote. When it comes to Victoria and our capital city, my fear is that for too long we've clung to the memories of our greatness. We put the awards in the pool room, as it were, but we didn't work hard enough over these last 4 years in particular, and some might even argue for a longer period than that, to give our state a new face and a new life. I think our state needs a shake-up. It needs more energy, more excitement. The pillars of our economy need reform, and being a Victorian has to mean something again. Under our opponents, I think we became, in many respects, a sleeping giant. Our state slipped behind, and it's going to take hard work and indeed big decisions to get us back in front. And everyone has to shoulder that responsibility and some of the burden, starting, of course, with government. Today I want to talk to you about some of the steps we're taking to keep Victoria #1 for jobs, #1 for investment, #1 for tourism, and #1 for major events. Before the election, I promised that the Labor government would appoint a panel of experts, of senior business and industry leaders, a small group, to help create high-skill, high-wage jobs for the future. An independent panel, harnessing the expertise of the private sector to cut through the bureaucracy and to get things done. Our budget gave the Premier's Jobs and Investment Panel a $500 million bursary, something that's not happened before. Advisory panels are quite common. The notion of then attaching to them a budget, that is new and very much about cutting through and getting things done. Today I can announce very proudly that the Premier's Jobs and Investment Panel will be chaired by Mr Harold Mitchell AC, someone well known to many of us as the founder of Mitchell Partners. Harold really is an icon of our creative state. He's chaired the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, the National Gallery, the Melbourne International Festival of Arts. He was the Vice President of Tennis Australia, playing a really big role in making what is arguably our most successful major event even more successful. And his expertise also extends into the health sector as chair of the Howard Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. And of course, Harold has formed his own foundation. His willingness for philanthropic giving and endowment is well known to all of us. He's one of the most authoritative voices on the growth of any company, any organisation, any state, and I'll be very proud to take his advice. I'm very grateful for him agreeing to play that role. On the panel, of course, he'll be joined by representatives of the Australian Industry Group, VECI, the Victorian Farmers Federation, the ACTU, and other notable Victorians, and we'll have more to say about the membership of that group quite soon. Together, they'll work really hard to give us a real long-term focus with a $500 million lever in full delivery of the commitment we made. I also want to talk today about our international investment. Things are moving really fast, nothing more so than growth and indeed change in Asia. Now, the Victorian government has a China strategy, but it was written in 2012. It was written before the Free Trade Agreement, which I'm very pleased to say has been signed in Canberra today. That's a fantastic outcome, and the federal government, the Trade Minister Andrew Robb, the Prime Minister and others should be very, very proud of that outcome. But our China strategy was written before the Free Trade Agreement. It was written before the big change, the fact that commodity prices have come off so sharply. It was written before our government outlined the 6 high-growth industries that we believe, and I think that experts believe, will be a really big part of defining our economic and employment future. And it was written before we started engaging really closely and meaningfully with the booming Western provinces in China. It's 3 years old, but as you see from that list of things it doesn't account for, it may as well be 30 years old. It's out of date, it's holding us back, it's just not fit for purpose, so we're going to renew it with the help of experts, people like John Denton from Cause, someone who's well known to many people for the leading role he played in Australia in the Asian Century White Paper for a former federal government. He and many others will work closely with the government to rewrite that strategy. We think that's critically important. It's just not contemporary. It needs to be rewritten, and it will be. This time, as part of that work, it'll include Sichuan province, where Victoria alone among Australian states has an in-market presence. And in September this year, I'll be making my first official overseas visit as Premier, and we'll be travelling to China. I hope and I'm certain that some members of the press gallery who are here today will join us on that trip, and I'll just say to them, get used to visiting China, because we will be visiting China at least once every year during my term as Premier of this state. It's just such an important market, such an important part of our future, and trust, not just trade, partnerships, not just profits, a more meaningful relationship, I think, is critically important to engaging and fulfilling all the potential that's uniquely part of that market, and a strong base. We've got a very strong story to tell already with our partnerships, but we need to update them, refresh them, and we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of every single opportunity in that market, not to the exclusion of others. There are many other important trading partners and potential partners, but China is very, very important to jobs in Melbourne, our suburbs, the regions, in every part of our state and in every industry. I want to talk about, in broader terms, the work that our trade commissioners do. It's very much part of the comments I've just made about China, among other markets. We're going to appoint a Deputy Trade Commissioner at the Victorian Government Business Office in China. This is not the usual practice. We have Trade Commissioners, we don't have deputies, but we're going to appoint a deputy. They, like all of our commissioners, are the eyes and the ears in our major overseas markets. This commissioner will have responsibility for the Western provinces, and we think that's the right decision to make. Our commissioners, be certain of this, are the ambassadors of the Victorian economy overseas. They're in many respects our face to the world. We have the biggest network of government business offices overseas of any state in our nation. Now, I want to be clear that the model, in my judgment, and I expect the judgment of many here today, has served us well, but the model needs to be refined. We have 9 positions, 2 of them are currently vacant, and the Labor government, before coming to office, we had made a commitment to open 3 new Victorian government business offices, 1 in Turkey, 1 in Singapore and 1 in Latin America. So I want to be really clear with you today, we are going to see some new faces, and I do hope we're going to see, I'm certain, more women in these roles, and I hope we're going to see some younger people in these roles as well, with a freshness of energy, a new approach, some fresh thinking, to update and refine a network that served us well, but I think one that can do so much better. These jobs, they're privileged positions. Well, they're not meant to be easy. In fact, they're not. They're very challenging, particularly in these times of economic transition and such a competitive world. The people who occupy these roles should be constantly chasing the deal. They should be chasing every last dollar, every last opportunity, and their role should carry with it the, shall we say, the absolutely relentless stress that, say, can be found on the stock exchange floor. These are good jobs, great opportunities, and they need to be more effective. They need to be more effective. They're not easy. Neither is being back here trying to find a way through some economic challenges that we all face. We will be, to that end, establishing firm performance targets. This is a new thing. For the first time ever, there will be firm performance targets for our government business offices overseas, and those targets will relate to things like investment and job creation, targets on the number of companies that are brought through the door, targets that can measure the effectiveness and the performance of the biggest, and I hope the best, overseas market engagement structure that any state has ever seen. It'll be my expectation that commissioners meet those targets. The reporting regime will be tightened, and it will be a public reporting regime. That sort of transparency, I think, is really very important in such competitive and challenging times. Now can I turn to major events and tourism? As I said, the Minister's here with us, and we know and understand just how important this sector is for jobs, for prosperity, for our future. Tourism and major events, our visitor economy, as it's sometimes known, it's not just part of our DNA as a state. It really is our edge. It is our edge. It's what sets us apart. It contributes some $20 billion to the Victorian economy each year, and there is, I think, an extraordinary potential for growth beyond that number. Just consider this for a moment. If every visitor to Victoria stayed on for just one extra night, it'd deliver another $2 billion to our economy each and every year. Our budget this year gave the biggest boost we've seen in a generation to our major events and visitor economy work, $80 million over 4 years. It is a big and significant boost, and in tight, tough budgetary times, I hope it's seen as a real signal of the importance we place on this sector. Just a few months ago as well, because it's not just about spending more, it's about making sure our models are as good as they can be. Just a few months ago, we announced for the first time in 20 years a comprehensive review of the Victorian visitor economy. We need it. I think we desperately need it to make sure that our settings are as contemporary, as effective as they can be. We face, I think, today a much more competitive tourism market, much more competitive, and things that may have worked in the 1990s or the 2000s are no longer enough. They're no longer enough. Things do need to change. I want to make a couple of comments about where we find ourselves now and some of the interim work of that important review. We have a lot of agencies dedicated to this sector. A lot of agencies, and I think that's one of our real problems in making the most of this edge, as I've spoken. Victoria has more independent institutions working across the visitor economy than any other state or indeed any other country around the world. I think that means that there is duplication, there is isolation, there are inefficiencies, and I think there are opportunities that are being lost. I recently received the interim findings of the Victorian Visitor Economy Review, and they tell me that the sector is fragmented and it lacks focus. Too much strategy and not enough implementation. And too many bureaucracies that simply aren't working together. I know this much: another long-term strategic document will not solve these problems. The solution, in my judgment, and the judgment of the government, is very clear. We need a single, unified voice to sell the strengths of our state. And that's why we're going to bring together every aspect of tourism, marketing and major events under the one roof with one body to get these systems working together, to end the duplication and to make sure that there are no longer any lost opportunities to what is such an important part of our story and our future. We can't have, let me put it to you this way, we can't have a body responsible for major events and a separate body responsible for the tourists who attend those major events. That just doesn't make any sense. We need one body with one mandate, one body with the independence and the prominence needed to promote our state. One body, one voice and one clear plan. Attract more visitors, attract more events, create more jobs. Pull together the most aggressive tourism and major events marketing campaign this state has ever seen. And I say state, the whole state. These are not just major events for Melbourne, therefore our entire state, something that's been lacking in recent years. All of this is about making Victoria a better place to live. It isn't quick though. This is going to take some time, and it's not throwing a policy solution at something. It's no quick fix. I think this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shake up this sector. It's about driving fundamental change at the heart of our tourism sector, this industry, our visitor economy, and all the many hundreds of thousands of Victorians whose livelihoods depend upon it. Growth in jobs and investment. It's also about the quality of our lives and the pride we take in our state as well. It's all bound up by decades of experience in hosting some of the biggest events in the world. That is our strength. I think we can all agree on that. Just consider this for a moment. Tonight, 90,000 people will be at the MCG to watch the State of Origin. In a few weeks, 90,000 people will be at the MCG to watch Collingwood play Hawthorn. A few weeks after that, 90,000 people will be at the MCG to watch Real Madrid play Man City. Where else in the world can you fill a stadium that size 3 times over in a month with 3 different sporting codes? No one does major events like we do. That's the case, but we need to make sure that we maintain that edge. The Premier of New South Wales will be here tonight, and the fact is he has to travel to Melbourne if he wants to know what a sellout State of Origin crowd looks like. All the way to Melbourne to see what I hope will be a record State of Origin crowd. That's something we should take great pride in, great pride indeed. As I've said, this is our edge, it's part of our DNA, it's part of our story, and it's going to be a bigger part of our economic future. And it's not just sport though. It's not just sport. And it's not just those who attend. I think that even if you can't make it to the ground or the theatre or the gallery, there is a real buzz around our city, around our state, a real buzz in the air when there are major events in town. It feels like home. It feels like what we do best, what we're about. And that's part of us. We have to find that more often. We have to really invest in that, do more and do better, and we're determined to do it. So today I've spoken to you about starting with jobs and investment, the heart of our economy, to trade commissioners, our face to the world, and then to tourism and major events, the soul of our modern state. All of these areas need more work. They need more energy. It will take hard work and big decisions, but it has to be done because we can't live forever in this 1990s haze. We can't rely forever on a Kennett Brack's legacy because that light is fading. There are a few signs dotted on freeways and in different public places around our state that say proudly, "Welcome to Melbourne, the world's most livable city." They're great signs. I don't want to see those at some time in the future sitting up in the Museum of Victoria. If you stand still, you get passed by. If you don't make the most of your advantages and turn them into your edge, turn your competitive position into a leading position, then others will take that from you. It's as simple as that. Things are competitive, things are tight, things are tough. Now's not the time for more policy documents. It's about real action and a determination to make the opportunities that are there the realities they need to be, and honestly and with hard work and determination confront the many challenges we face and turn those into the opportunities that we know they can be. That's what leadership is all about, in my judgment, ladies and gentlemen. As I said at the outset, the people of Victoria gave to us the greatest of gifts, an enormous responsibility. We're not wasting one moment in delivering the things I've talked about today or the many other things I could talk about and maybe we'll be drawn to in questions. I thank you for the kind invitation and the opportunity to be here with you today. Be in no doubt, like any government, some people agree with our vision for our state, some people don't. But one thing all Victorians can be certain of, we will not waste a day and we will not see even one opportunity pass us by. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Premier. We have about 30 minutes available for questions. Can you please say your name and your organisation when you grab the microphone? There is a roving microphone going around the room. Starting with some working journalists, please. Then we'll move to the broader crowd. Josh.
Josh Gordon from The Age. Thanks for your speech, Premier. I'm just going off topic a bit, but I'm wondering if you've had the chance to relax and watch the killing season on the ABC, and if so, what sort of lessons do you think you can learn about how you might intend to navigate through the factional system in Victoria and prevent the Labor Party from killing itself from the inside out?
Well, thanks for the positive start to questions, Josh. Such an uplifting... Anyway, no. Look, I watched it last night. I saw just the last few minutes of the first episode. I haven't had an opportunity to catch up on it, but I did watch it last night, and I'll probably find the time to watch it next week. It's just a very sad story. I said to Barry Cassidy before, it was a toxic soap opera what went on up there. I said as much at the time. And I chose my words very carefully on that evening of the 29th of November, and I have many times, even today in the speech, talked about government being a precious gift. If you're in this not just to defeat your opponent, if you're in it to win the prize, that is the opportunity, the privilege, the great honour of governing, and the awesome responsibility that sometimes involves, almost always involves, then the notion of wasting that, the notion of frittering that away, consumed by yourself, that's sad. It really is. And what was allowed to go on, what grew, what became that government's story, was not something that you've seen in Victoria ever, and you won't. You simply won't. The great tragedy of last night's program and that 6-year period is we should be talking about the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We should be talking about a much fairer industrial relations system where you get the bargain right. We should be talking about things like the regional rail link that I proudly got to open. Warren Truss was there, and it was great to welcome Warren to Victoria, but it's a Labor project delivered because of a partnership between Kevin Rudd and John Brumby. You know, there's so many things, and I can go talk about the biggest ever pension increase. We can talk about, there are 50, 100, maybe more, really iconic things that that government achieved, and sadly we're not talking about those things. We're not making TV programs about those things. We're instead focused on a lack of discipline and the absolute toxicity of where that government got to. I lead a unified, reforming, talented team that understand this is a great gift, and the people who only ever get the life opportunities they're entitled to when there's a Labor government, and indeed all Victorians, are relying upon us to be a very different government than the one depicted last night. And I'd put it to you with a sense of positivity that we are a very different government and will continue to be.
Hi Premier, Matt Johnston from the Herald Sun. Were there any particular problems with the overseas trade officers and commissioners that have led to your decision to change the way they report? And will this give you the power to effectively sack them if they're not performing well? And also, just on trade, you've spoken a bit about that. How disappointing is it that your minister at the moment is stood down and that you've had to assume those responsibilities this far into your government? And why did you take on those responsibilities rather than give them to another minister?
No worries. So we'll deal with those three questions. Firstly, I've actually forgotten what the first one was. No. In terms of the new framework, let's be positive about this. It's not about hunting anyone, right? I think that over time, over a long period of time, these officers have worked really well. And dedicated, committed, hard-working people have performed those roles. They're not easy tasks. And at the same time, though, I'm conscious that we have to always try and do better. You know, I don't think it's the most diverse group you could possibly have. I think there needs to be more women. There need to be some people that are in their 30s, perhaps, 40s even. You know, it needs to be a younger group, I think. I'd make no comment about individuals. They were all back here recently. They have a thing where they come back to Victoria for a week or so, 2 weeks, I think, meet with the department. They had an opportunity to meet with me. You know, they're good people who are hard-working, but it does need a refresh. And we need to, in a positive sense, we need to have a structure that can hold that group, whatever it'll look like. And there will be change. As I said, there are a couple of vacancies and there are 3 new officers. So we're going from 9 to 12. And the vacancies that will obviously necessitate some new people also. It's going to be a fresh group, and I think that's a good thing. And that fresh group will be accountable in a way they've never been accountable before, to you, to me, to the entire community for the work that they do. I think that's a positive change. Look, in terms of Minister Somyurek, there was a serious complaint made. In fairness to all parties involved, that's being dealt with at arm's length from me, arm's length from any member of the caucus. The Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet is properly investigating that. And in the year 2015, I have had some people suggest to me that it might have been handled differently. Well, it's not 1950. And if you make a complaint, any worker in any workplace, you ought to be able to rely on a robust complaints process, and that will lead us wherever it leads us. It needs to be done properly. It's not been prejudged. It's at a distance from government, and that's the way that it should be. In terms of trade, I felt it was appropriate to take on the responsibilities that the Minister was stood down from. That'll be just for a matter of weeks, and and then we'll see what comes of the report and the process, the investigation that the Secretary is dealing with.
Premier Michael Mangos from the Melbourne Press Club. Moving away from the economy a bit and into social justice type of issues, domestic and family violence. Just wondering, you were big on it as opposition leader. I'm just wondering where you're at in terms of where your government's at with that issue. Thanks
very much, Michael. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. But can I say, in your introduction, you talked about it as a sort of as a social issue. This is as much an economic issue, given the cost of productivity, the enormous cost in terms of personal potential and the personal capacity that can't be realised because of what is, without a doubt, the number one law and order issue, the number one law and order challenge, a national emergency, really, that is family violence. It's also a national shame that it's taken us this long to do something meaningful about it. Now, I don't criticise people who have worked in this space to raise awareness. They've done a fantastic job, and we should celebrate that. I don't criticise people who every hour of every day provide some of the most challenging services to really vulnerable Victorians. They do a great job. Our Victoria Police members, it's a long list of people. But we've gone, this last year, 2014, 68,000 incidents reported to Victoria Police. That's an 82% increase on 2010. Not 2000, 2010. 82% more. Now, we should celebrate the fact that more women, not exclusively women, but the vast majority, women feel confident and capable and safe to come forward. That's something to celebrate. But I think the time has come to not just celebrate increased awareness and increased reporting, but to actually do something about it. And that starts for me in what is perhaps not seen as political leadership, but I think in some respects it is, because it's not that often the politicians are prepared to stand up and say, I don't have all the answers. It's broken, it needs to be repaired, and I don't have all the magic answers to fix it. We made that commitment back in May last year at the last state conference before the state poll. I meant it then. It was a pretty powerful moment in that I gave the speech. There's 1,000 people in the room, and there was silence, there was tears, then there was people standing up in the most amazing applause I've ever heard. And that to me just said, the time has come. This issue can wait no longer. We need to do what Victorians do best. We need to lead our nation, not just in change but in reform. And the Family Violence Royal Commission will give us the answers we need. It'll give us the blueprint we need for the future. And Marcia Neave, I think, is an outstanding choice. I think Fiona Richardson is doing an outstanding job as Australia's First Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence. These learnings, these recommendations, they will keep our government honest, and they will, to a certain extent, keep every government that comes after us honest. That's the power of the highest and most formal type of inquiry, having a Royal Commission into this issue. And we already are, but we will continue to lead our nation on this. I'll just leave you at this point when it comes to what I've said is a national emergency and what is undoubtedly our national shame. Just think about this for a moment. If a woman a week was being murdered by complete strangers, so if a woman a week was being murdered by a complete stranger, we'd have the army in the streets, for heaven's sake. We'd be doing much more, much earlier. As it is, a woman a week is being murdered by a current or former partner, and it has taken us till 2015 to establish a Royal Commission to do more, to do better, to keep Victorian women and their children safe. It'll cost a lot. It will. It will cost a lot. But I think Victoria's women and children are worth every cent.
Premier, good afternoon. Mia Greaves from 7 News. Just two questions for you on the news of the day. Firstly, the bail for fugitive Panit. Just wondering if you're concerned about that, considering that he was on the run for 5 years. And secondly, the passing of Ron Clark.
Sure, thanks, Mia. Well, firstly, can I say, it's not my practice to speak about individual cases. I don't think our justice system is well served if politicians do that. But I will say this. I think every Victorian would be absolutely shocked today to learn that this man has been given bail. That makes no sense to me at all. I am confident, though, that the federal authorities will be working closely with Indian authorities to deal with this particular person, to bring him to justice. To that end, I've asked our Attorney-General to speak with his federal counterparts to say, look, if there's anything we can do as a Victorian government, we stand ready to do it, to bring this man to justice and to give this family who've suffered so very much over these last 7 years the closure and the justice that they are absolutely entitled to. In terms of Ron Clark, well, this is a life well lived, and I know that whether it's the 17 records he broke, the great way in which he participated in athletics, something he loved so very much, or in more recent times, the work he did as the Mayor of the Gold Coast, a very big and substantial city. I know that it was a life well lived, and we're very grateful to have known him and to have benefited from his contribution, and I'm sure his family and friends will take some small comfort from the fact that he's so fondly remembered today and that he'll be missed by so many people.
Good afternoon, Premier. Lauren Hilbert from 3AW. Just back to major events. You've announced a push to attract major events to Victoria in what is, as you've described, a competitive market. New South Wales is no doubt one of those competitors. Mike Baird this morning has described Melbourne as miserable, rainy and disappointing. How would you describe Sydney?
No, I'm not going to get into that. What I will say, no, just again, let me have another go at it. I'm going to be absolutely delighted to welcome Mike Baird to the MCG tonight so he can finally see a full house for a State of Origin game. I don't think there's any better way to answer your question than to say that, and I'm sure that while Mr Baird is here, he can have some good coffee. It's not something he'd often get to have. He can visit some fine restaurants, some outstanding restaurants. Again, something that would be not a frequent part of his daily routine. There'll be lots of things he'll be able to do in our great city and our great state that so many from around the world come to Melbourne and Victoria to do. So we're very happy to welcome him here. This is where all the action is. This is where the energy is. This is where a really positive and optimistic agenda for the future is taking shape. Is always welcome, always.
Premier Farrah Thompson from the Sunday Age. Parliament, as you know, recently passed a motion put up by your government to look into so-called end-of-life matters that would pave the way for a broader debate on everything from dying with dignity, voluntary euthanasia, palliative care. In the lead-up to last year's state election, you mentioned that you would be keen on looking at legislative changes to allow people to set clearer directives about future conditions that they might have, such as dementia, cancer, etc.
Yep.
Are you still going to do that? And I guess on the broader issue of dying with dignity more broadly, do you support voluntary euthanasia and believe that perhaps it is now the time for a shift in the law?
Thanks, Farrah. It's a really important question. The Parliament decided to send this basket of issues, a range of different complex issues, off to a parliamentary inquiry. I think that work has already started, and we'll wait to see what comes back from that work. In terms of the first part of your question, the issue of advanced care directives, or the ability to make a direction or to have your wishes expressed, not just for your treatment in terms of a condition you currently have, but for future conditions you might not yet have. I very much support making that change, and we will legislate, we'll put before the Parliament changes to make it possible, subject to a soundness of mind test, subject to recency. So you'd need to go to your GP, for instance, and have these orders updated, whether it be every 3 years, every 5 years. The last thing we'd want is a dispute over what might have been your wish 10 years ago when it's actually needed. But I don't think that only those who currently suffer a particular condition should be the ones who are able to specify what care they want and what care they don't want. I think everybody, with appropriate safeguards, should be able to express that view. So those advanced care directives or changes to the Medical Treatment Act, we're all very clear about those, and we'll make those changes, the exact timing of which I might need to come back to you on. The other thing we can do as well is there's a great program that's run out of the Austin Hospital called the Respecting Patient Choices program, and that's about informing loved ones, staff members as well as those who are ill, of their rights, what's afforded to them at the moment under the Medical Treatment Act and various medical power of attorney options. The lawyers in the room will be well acquainted with this work. But it's no good having a great legislative framework if no one knows about it. So there's some great staff out there who've been running a statewide program. I'm not sure how that's gone in these last 4 years, but we'll look at whether we can enhance that also. On ending a person's life or assisting them to end their life, I've been a health minister. That's shaped my view around some of the risks associated with that. I think that there are some challenges, particularly in a system where there are very finite resources. We need to be very careful to get the balance right. I don't support at this stage, on what I've read, what I've seen, making the sort of change that some people would like to make. But I do readily acknowledge that there's certainly more momentum, there's perhaps more public support for this change than there has ever been. My objection is not a faith-based objection. It's not a matter of me imposing my personal values on the Victorian community. I'm loath to do that on any issue. But there are some safeguard issues, there's some balance issues that I'm troubled by. But it certainly has much stronger support today than it's perhaps ever had. That's what the pollsters would tell you in terms of lots of published data we see in your newspaper and others. So I think that deals with the three issues. And my position hasn't changed on either of those issues. The ending of someone's life or assisting them to do it, or our determination to change the Medical Treatment Act.
Angus Livingston, AAP. Just back on the economy, you promised before the election to create 100,000 jobs in 2 years. We're about a quarter of the way there. We're seeing some BAE jobs about to go. How are we tracking on that goal? Is that going to be met in the next 2 years, or is it more of an aspirational goal now?
No, Angus, we're very keen to deliver on all the commitments that we made, and as I said before, some things we do people will be supportive of, some things we do perhaps they won't be. But every Victorian will know that we're true to our word and we're good for the promises we make. I'm really pleased that last week's jobs numbers showed that in the first 6 months, in our first 6 months, 55,400 jobs had been created. If you compare that to the first 6 months of the previous government, there was some 12,500 jobs created in that period. Now, numbers jump around and 6 months doesn't make the whole 4-year term or any of those things. So with all those appropriate caveats, that's a pretty strong start. But every job is worth fighting for, and you mentioned BAE Systems. I'm desperately disappointed and upset that what we said would happen has actually happened. Like I said it to the Prime Minister, one-on-one, I said, you've got to give this business an opportunity to compete. They need an order book, and they need you to get on and deliver it. Otherwise, this cliff, the valley of death, whatever term you want to put on it, would come, and that these jobs would be lost. And then, of course, we'll have these industry policy naysayers in Canberra who think it's they think industry policy is some sort of a dirty word almost, which I just think is wrong. In these times of change and real economic transition, there is a role for the government to play. These rationalists, that's the best thing you could call them, these rationalists will then say, oh, well, we can't build these ships here because there's no industry, having played a part in killing the industry by not having a continuous build program. It's pretty obvious. And hopefully from this, the next time the Victorian government gives the federal government a bit of advice about the Victorian economy, something we know a thing or two about, and manufacturing and business and jobs and skills. Look, I've been to BAE Systems, I'm sure, many more times than Tony Abbott has. And we gave him the warning, and they just chose not to follow it. And now, sadly, there's going to be people whose livelihoods are, their families are going to be in a very, very difficult set of circumstances. So, whether it's Land 400, the surface fleet, subs, or a range of other defence procurement decisions, I just again in a spirit of outcomes, let's be loyal to them and them only. Leave the politics at the door. I would urge Tony Abbott, we need continuous build and we need a strong local content target. It's Australian taxes that pay for this equipment, and those taxes should support Australian jobs. And if you can't understand that, then what you're really saying to the community is, well, as the leader of Australia, you're more interested in economic development on the other side of the world than you are in economic development in your own nation. I won't settle for that. I won't accept that. We'll keep fighting against that. But hopefully we get some better decisions, much more timely decisions, on things like defence procurement. We think this is an industry, a sector that can really grow in our state, and these jobs are worth fighting for. Then, of course, I could give you half an hour or more on the strategic importance. Our type of warfare is unique, and capability around maintenance and build, so that we don't just get the best off somebody else's shelf, but instead get bespoke, fit-for-purpose equipment so that our dedicated men and women who serve in the defence of our freedom get the best equipment possible for us, not a version of somebody else's best. I think there's all of those strategic reasons as well why this industry should be strongly backed. Not with any welfare, just an order. Put a tender out there and do it in a timely way. I reckon our shipbuilders will win that work, because they do the best work anywhere.
Premier Peter Wood from Inter-Ellison. On behalf of Victorians, given your recent infrastructure announcements, can I thank you for getting on with it? In terms of your rolling stock announcements, you've indicated there will be a 50% local content requirement. Apart from the obvious securing a Victorian jobs result, what other opportunities does the rolling stock procurement announcements hold for the state?
Thanks very much, and thanks for your support of today's event. We have made a number of announcements around infrastructure in the last few months, coming off the back of the budget. They're all funded, they're all really moving ahead with a sense of momentum. They've all got strong business cases as well. They're real positives. And then, of course, there's Transurban's proposal around the Western distributor, which we're working very hard with them to hopefully be able to conclude a negotiation that delivers good value for the taxpayer and lets what is, Brian Negus and I were just talking before I got up to make a few comments that this is an outstanding project, a very elegant project. But on rolling stock, this industry, I spent a lot of time talking to our rolling stock manufacturers and those who, in a really dependent supply chain, rely upon this industry. We've talked to a lot of them over a long period of time, and they've said to us, very similar to the defence procurement story, we just need a long-term order. Give us an order, we'll bid, we'll compete, we'll work really hard, and we'll deliver you on time and on budget a fantastic product. That's what Alstom in Ballarat does, it's what Bombardier does, it's what potentially some other players who, because of the decisions we've made, can now come into this market, will be able to deliver the best products at a really good price, but best value in the broadest context. It's supporting local jobs, local skills, diversity in the Victorian economy, and it keeps the capability alive. And I think that's an investment. That's the difference between costs and making a sound investment for the future. This is a 10-year order. This is well north of a couple of $2 billion, 100 new trains, 100 new trams. There's some bus procurement in this as well, and not just more of the same either. We will see a high-capacity, next-generation carriage around the Dandenong Line project that'll be relevant to the whole network over time. The interface between that and a high-capacity signalling program is well known to most people. You can understand how much potential that unlocks, together with, of course, getting rid of those boom gates, 50 of them, deadly and dangerous and holding our network back, as well as things like Melbourne Metro Rail. All of these investments are a sequence, a well-planned and well-thought-out sequence in delivering a system that's safer, more efficient, and is best summed up by turn up and go. No timetable needed. You turn up and you go. Hong Kong does it, New York, London, Singapore, Paris, so many great cities of the world do this, we can too. But the question was about what does that rolling stock decision mean in a broader context? What it means is those Victorian players have been talking to us recently, and I've been talking with some of our colleagues in Canberra on both sides of the aisle, a national rolling stock strategy is not beyond us. There's no reason, with more players in the market and the certainty that our Victorian order book provides, that trains in other parts of Australia, that other public transport assets, buses are another really significant option, need to be made on the other side of the world. They can be made here, or they can be assembled here with a whole-of-life maintenance option. That's what the power of Victorian leadership is all about. Not only good outcomes for public transport users, and therefore all of us, because the more people who are off the roads using public transport, the better answer we have for the traffic congestion that we know is a challenge. But it's also great for skills and jobs domestically, if you like, or within our state, but it can go much, much further than that. That's the power of giving this industry certainty and a long-term work program.
Got time for a couple more. One over there, then you two.
Premier, thank you for your talk. John Allen, Melbourne Press Club. It's interesting when you see a table of Kelvington students over in the corner and consider that they won't even be thinking about their bucket list until they're about 100 years old, if what we believe the prognosis to be, that people are going to be living longer. But it strikes me that there are three inconvenient truths. People are living longer, they're living with chronic disease, and governments around the world are increasingly finding this a huge challenge. And I know, take for example, Royal District Nursing Service have been active in China as China reaches out for some sort of education and learnings that RDNS can offer as they approach something like 230 million people over the age of 60. And I was just wondering about your views, particularly with your China comments today, whether or not there are opportunities such as, for RDNS to take up and help the Asian countries as they grapple with this huge problem.
Well, thanks, John. I'd say to you that I think there's great earning potential. There's great job creating potential in, and this is why the FTA is so important, taking our know-how, our proven performance, and not just concepts, but our know-how in service delivery to other parts of the world, and selling the intellectual property, the training modules, the competence, if you like, that we have, particularly to those economies in our region where there's a burgeoning, a growing middle class, where things like food security are critically important. And there's a whole range of processes and systems that we can sell. Things like road safety, or again, we already have a TAC International, and they do great work around our unique product here and the fact that we've proved it up over time. In health particularly, education as well, whether it's in Sharjah or in other parts of the world, we already have some commercial parts of the work that we do. But in health particularly, that's where probably the biggest potential is. Things we do well, lives we save, care we provide, disability adjusted life years that we extend, particularly in terms of chronic disease management and some of that work. I think there are some great products that we can take to the world, not in a philanthropic sense, although we probably need to do some of that. This is a commercial opportunity. Just let me, so I'm in furious agreement with you. Let me finish with one example of that though. Some people talk about tourism. We should be bringing wealthy people from around the world to come and get high-end care here. Well, that's something people talk about. I think of infinitely more value is to bring those who are in training. So for instance, to build a situation where the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, rather than having a Medi-Hotel component, instead, as a centre of treatment, training and research, becomes the place that if you are in Asia and you want to be an oncologist, you need to have done some training at Melbourne's Comprehensive Cancer Centre. Something like that. The economic opportunity in that model is far superior to a series of high net worth individuals coming to get some care. If we can help, we already do a lot of that work now anyway. But it's the export of our expertise. That's where the jobs are. And RDNS and hundreds of others, with some support, may be able to take their unique offering and their track record and put that to great economic use, not just for them as organisations, but for all of us.
As we wrap up, Premier, one on the bucket list of current day Kilvington Grammar students is to ask a question of the Premier, so we turn the microphone in this direction.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Abby and I'm from Kilvington Grammar. Premier Andrews, in 10 years, what job opportunities do you see opening up for students like ourselves?
Thank you, Abby. And the last time I was here, the student question, I was given a warning as to what the student question would be. I want to assure you no such warning was provided today. So a genuine question without notice and a really good question. To tell you the truth, I don't know that any of us know. We can have a good guess, we can have an educated guess even. I think if you deal with the things we do know, it won't be one job, it won't be one career, it won't be one pathway, it won't be one set of skills. It'll be lots of different things over a long period of time. You'll have a longer working life in lots of different ways, and your career options based on the skills you attain in these critical years, but throughout your working life, with a really big change to the way vocational education works, that constant learning. That's why in your earlier years, learning how to learn is so very important. But if you ask me which are the sectors that are going to grow really fast, and therefore you might be more likely to be in, I think medical devices, the pharmaceuticals sector, defence technology, construction technology, professional services as the hub for our nation and potentially our region, the visitor economy and all the services that come with that I've spoken about today will be an increasingly important part of our offering. Food and fibre, agribusiness as much as agriculture, and then the things that we've always done well, our hospitals and our education system that may be not unrecognisable in 10 years, but they'll be different and they'll need different people, and they'll need people who can constantly update their skills and their competence to perform ever-changing roles. That can be seen as uncertainty. I'd say to you, that's a really exciting thing. It's really exciting that if we can just make this transition instead of in an increasingly eloquent way talking about the problem, we have to now actually make this transition. I think there are many more fulfilling, rewarding and varied employment opportunities than certainly my parents had and certainly their parents had. So keep studying hard, keep coming up with lots of great questions, because that's a really important part of all of this as well. I hope the answer's been useful to you, but with a real sense of optimism. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time, I think that we can be not just talking about some of these opportunities, but celebrating the fact that we've done something meaningful about them.
And just one very quick final question over here.
Tessa Ackerman from The Australian.
Tessa.
Going back to BAE, is there a future for manufacturing in Victoria? And if not, or if there's not as much of a future, how are you going to help the people transition? Are you going to go down the usual routes of grants, or are you looking for something slightly different and a bit more innovative?
Thanks very much. That's a really important question, and I think you've answered it in that last point. I think we do need to be much more innovative. I think some of the old ways won't work in what is a rapidly changing economic environment, a really competitive environment. You know, so many of the locations that we used to be fearful of, say 20, 30 years ago, we'd say, oh, you know, they're low-cost locations. Energy's cheaper, labour's cheaper. They'll pinch some of this work from us. Well, most of those are now low-cost and high-tech locations. So the challenge is a very different one. We have to be smarter. Many politicians have said that for a long time, but we do. We have to recognise and embrace and make part of our competitive advantage the fact that change is the norm now. Things are unsettled. Things are constantly evolving. We ought to be able to respond and adapt to that change better than those other markets. So far from being fearful of them, we ought to be embracing of the fact that our offering is uniquely placed to respond better to many of the things that we can't actually control. So that's that point about turning challenges into the opportunities that we know they can be. Of the sectors I just listed for you, and this answers the first part of your question, I'm very bullish about manufacturing, but very different manufacturing in process, in product, and in terms of performance and its profile, the way it looks, than what we might have called manufacturing 20 years ago or 50 years ago. But of the industries I just listed for you, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, construction technology, so much of this is about manufacturing. I think we're going to be an economy that continues to make things, and we're going to be an economy that continues to trade in the knowledge that is uniquely ours. And that comes from a great skill set. And finally, I think that you can't answer this question without making some reference to the fact that none of this change, none of this adaptation, none of this transition is possible without supporting early years, primary, secondary, and our TAFE system. If you don't fund those building blocks, then you'll make very little and you'll do very poorly. Thank you all very much.